Hey everyone, Ethan here. I think that it's pretty obvious at this point that I love the Halo series. Since covering the first game, I played countless hours of Halo Infinite, watched several hours of Halo esports, and even attended both of the World Championship events in Seattle, Washington. With that said, it should be no surprise that I would eventually cover the second game in the franchise. Speaking of the first game, this video is technically a follow-up to that video, which I highly recommend you watch before this one, as I will be talking about certain plot elements and referencing things I said in that video. Much like Combat Evolved, I didn't obtain or play the games in their release order. Actually, Halo 2 was the last possible game I could have played at the time. With it probably being around mid-2012, I had already played CE, 3, ODST, and Reach. Halo 2 is a direct sequel to Combat Evolved, introducing new gameplay mechanics, a new story following up on the events that took place in CE, new enemies, and new multiplayer offerings. As a disclaimer, like I did in the CE video, I will be talking about a lot more than is probably necessary because I love this series that much. The gameplay is very similar to its predecessor while adding new elements to make things more exciting. The biggest of which is probably the ability to hold and fire two weapons at once. Dual wielding, as it's called, can be done using a select few of the smaller weapons like pistols like the Magnum or Plasma Pistol, or SMGs like the SMG, Plasma Rifle, and Needler. You also don't have to hold the same two weapons. You can mix and match to your liking for varying results. A decent combo in my opinion is a Plasma Pistol and a Magnum. While dual wielding, you cannot throw grenades or melee. If you attempt to, then you'll automatically drop your second weapon. You can reload both weapons, but it takes considerably longer than if you were just holding one. Another highly touted addition is the ability to hijack and board enemy vehicles. In the past, if you wanted to get rid of an enemy vehicle, your only options were to either destroy it or find a way to flip it, ejecting the enemy. Now if you're close enough, you can hold your reload button to hijack smaller vehicles, which sees you ejecting the enemy from the vehicle, taking it over yourself. If you do this to a vehicle with multiple passengers, you will only eject the enemy in the seat that you're closest to. For larger vehicles like tanks, instead of hijacking them, you can board the front or back of the vehicle and have the choice of meleeing or planting a grenade. Sometimes you need to melee first to damage the vehicle enough to be able to plant a grenade. Planting a grenade will kill the driver instead, giving you access to the vehicle. The last and probably least impactful gameplay addition is the introduction of mounted turrets. In both campaign and multiplayer, you'll find mounted UNSC and Covenant turrets that act as a middle ground between weapons and vehicles. When using them, you cannot do any action other than shoot, but you have a powerful weapon at your disposal. This game also tried its hand at proper boss battles, with there being 3 throughout the campaign to varying results, which I'll go more into later. Lastly, I want to talk about the things Halo 2 changed/removed. The first and most obvious of which is the removal of the health bar. In terms of health, the game focuses pretty much solely on your shields. You still technically have health, being able to take a few shots while you have no shields before you go down, but it isn't shown to you. Your shields now recharge much quicker as a result. Also, for some reason, your shield indicator has been moved from the top center of your screen to just above your radar, which I don't really like, but at the same time isn't hard to get used to. A neat addition is the ability to effectively zoom with non-scoped weapons. I'm not sure if the game calls it this, but I've always referred to this as using binoculars. The other change is that fall damage has effectively been removed. I say effectively because if you fall a fairly large distance, then you'll die before hitting the bottom, but that's all. Besides all that, the game feels a bit floatier compared to CE, if that makes sense. It feels like you can jump higher, vehicles don't automatically kill you if they so much as breathe on you, and a fair amount of environmental objects can now be moved around. Also, your AI allies have received upgrades as well. They're now able to drive you around, although their skills are questionable, and you now have the ability to trade weapons with them. Giving them certain weapons can sometimes really help out, like giving a Marine a rocket launcher and having them be in the passenger seat of a Warthog is a fantastic way to plow through enemies. Named AI companions are also now indestructible, so giving them good weapons might not be a bad idea either. Before diving into the story, I want to mention that much like CE, Halo 2 also received the anniversary treatment when it turned 10, giving the campaign a new modern look with new music and sounds. Similarly to my video on it, I will be talking about the plot, followed by the missions, then characters, and then the factions. Anything that I consider to be spoilers will be marked accordingly. As a general overview, Halo 2's story starts a few short months after the events of CE. It again follows Master Chief and Cortana, who now have to fend off the Covenant against humanity's homeworld of Earth. There's also a second plotline heavily fleshing out the Covenant, detailing their motivations, ideology, and structure all from an insider perspective. The campaign can be played solo or co-op with one other player locally or even online depending on the version you're playing. The 4 difficulty options remain the same from CE, being easy, normal, heroic, and legendary. The game has a whopping 15 listed missions, although that number is a bit deceiving. I'm gonna do what I did last time, where I'll put a ranking next to the mission's name to better give you a sense of how I feel about each mission. The first mission, the Heretic, doesn't feature any gameplay as it's only a cutscene, and the second mission, the Armory, isn't much more involved, only being a tutorial section very similar to the one you see at the beginning of Pillar of Autumn in CE. The third mission, Cairo Station, is where the game really starts, having you defend the space station against a Covenant assault. It does a great job refamiliarizing you with Halo's mechanics while also introducing you to new things like dual wielding, mounted turrets, and even the new drone enemies. The next mission, Outskirts, lets you finally set foot on Earth, fighting Covenant in the streets, alleyways, beaches, and tunnels. This mission also reintroduces hunters and newly introduces 3 new Covenant vehicles: the iconic Scarab tank, the even more recognizable Phantom dropship, and the blink and you'll miss it Shadow transport. While I'll go more into it later, it is also this mission that is partially infamous for introducing The following mission, Metropolis, is a direct continuation of Outskirts, this time focusing more on vehicle combat, with warthogs, scorpions, ghosts, banshees, and even the first case of drivable wraiths, culminating in a direct assault on the Scarab itself. This mission has always been one of my favorites in not just this game, but the series as a whole. Now before moving on, this is where I would argue that if you haven't played the game and don't want anything spoiled for you, then this is the part where you should skip to a non-spoiler section. The game's 6th mission, The Arbiter, is where the game throws a curveball, being the first of 6 where you play as a Covenant elite now known as The Arbiter. He plays pretty much exactly the same as Chief, with a purple HUD instead of blue, and different sound effects for your shields. The one big difference is that instead of a flashlight, Arbiter has the ability to use a temporary active camo. You are tasked with taking out a group of Covenant deserters aided by Sentinels that are now actively against the Covenant's cause. The Oracle is another mission that takes place directly after its predecessor, featuring the reintroduction of the Flood and the game's first of 3 boss fights, this one being with the Heretic leader. This level also follows Halo's tradition of having a level that features a part of a different level but in reverse. The following level jumps back to Master Chief and Cortana, taking place on a Halo ring, this one being called Delta Halo or Installation 05. This level features both on-foot and vehicle combat and is well loved. It never resonated with me the same as most others, but I still enjoy it. Also, it introduced the now highly revered ODSTs. The next level, Regret, again picks up right where Delta Halo left off, with Chief in hot pursuit of one of the Covenant's prophets. This level is notorious for its difficulty, overabundance of Jackal snipers, and difficult boss fight at the end. After that, we switch back to the Arbiter for Sacred Icon, which takes place at a snowy Forerunner facility, having you now fight only the Flood and Sentinels. Quarantine Zone takes place immediately after, having a bigger focus on vehicles with the introduction of the Spectre. We jump back over to Chief, who is now fighting his way through the Covenant Holy City of High Charity in this mission, Gravemind. This is also the first level that has you fighting against brutes. This level is most notorious for its abrupt and aggressive beginning, and rightfully so, but it's a pretty fun and dynamic level overall. Following that is Uprising, which now sees Arbiter fighting on the surface of the ring against brutes, jackals, and drones. Then the perspective switches again to Chief's final level, High Charity, with him now trekking through a flood-infested city, all the while trying to stop the Prophet of Truth from escaping. Finally, we switch back to the Arbiter in the 15th and final mission, The Great Journey, which has a little bit of everything. Vehicle combat, tight quarters action, backtracking, all culminating in an unlikely alliance against the final boss Tartarus, chieftain of the Brutes. This last level just barely beats out Metropolis for being my favorite in the game. To put a bow on it, Halo 2 has a mixed bag of missions with some of the best in this series, as well as a fair amount of mediocre ones too. The story begins by showing the consequences of Alpha Halo's destruction first from the point of view of the Covenant. More specifically, the elite commander that led the assault on the Pillar of Autumn getting debriefed by the 3 leaders of the faction being a never-before-seen species that we know as Prophets. The 3 leaders being Truth, Mercy, and Regret. The leaders and Covenant as a whole place the blame of the Ring's destruction pretty much solely on this elite. It is also here where the Brutes and Tartarus are introduced. This immediately fleshes out so much about what used to be a one-dimensional faction. We then cut on over to the Cairo space station above Earth, where the Master Chief and Cortana are reintroduced, with Chief now donning his iconic Mjolnir Mark VI armor. At the same time, Sergeant Johnson is revealed to have somehow survived the events of the first game. Back on the Covenant side, we see that the Elite is stripped of his armor, tortured, and branded with the mark of shame for his failure. In contrast, on the UNSC side, we see new character Lord Hood rewarding Master Chief and Johnson with medals for their efforts on Installation 04, and Miranda Keyes, daughter of the captain from CE, accepting a reward on his behalf. The first major conflict happens when a Covenant fleet led by the Prophet of Regret suddenly arrives to invade Earth. Chief does what he does best by defending the station from a bomb, and retaliates with what is revered as one of the most badass moments in Halo by giving the Covenant back their bomb. The Covenant specifically attacks the city of New Mombasa, located in Africa, for an unspecified reason. Chief and co fend off the attack to the best of their ability, taking down a scarab in the process. Eventually, the Covenant decide to leave, making a slip space jump inside the city. Miranda, commander of the UNSC frigate in amber clad, along with Chief, Cortana, and Johnson, manage to enter through the slipspace portal before it closes. The ensuing explosion caused by the portal closing absolutely decimates the city, leaving it in ruin. Back on High Charity, Truth and Mercy decide that instead of executing the elite commander, he will instead take up the mantle of the Arbiter rank, a title that's given to shunned elite warriors who are sent on perilous missions eventually meant to kill them. The newly dubbed Arbiter is then sent on his first mission to the gas giant Threshold to silence a group of Covenant defectors simply referred to as heretics. It is on this mission where we meet an elite commander known to many as either Shipmaster or Halfjaw. I've always called him Shipmaster, so that's what I'm going to call him here. The heretic faction is being aided by local sentinels due to their allyship with returning character 343 Guilty Spark. The Flood are also here, but that isn't really important. The mission comes to a head with the Arbiter confronting the heretic leader, who initially tries to convince Arbiter that the Covenant's so-called Great Journey is a lie, before attempting to seize an opportunity with the Arbiter's guard down and kill him. But unfortunately for him, the Arbiter ends up winning in the end, killing the heretic leader. Guilty Spark is apprehended by Tartarus, and they all head back to High Charity. Switching back on over to the UNSC, the Covenant ship and in Amberclad arrive at their destination, and the UNSC realizes that they're staring at another Halo ring. Without skipping a beat, both Covenant and UNSC forces are deployed to the surface where a battle ensues. This time, Chief's mission is now to capture or kill Regret. During the mission, Chief and Cortana find out that the Covenant's mission is to activate the ring and purge all life in the galaxy, which the Covenant refers to as the Great Journey. Eventually, Chief catches up to Regret and punches him to death. Just as he does, a massive fleet of Covenant ships arrive above the ring, including High Charity itself. The ships attempt to bombard Chief from orbit with heavy plasma weaponry, which as a fun fact is called glassing. Chief manages to jump in the water below, saving him from being blasted, but is pulled further under by an unknown entity. Due to Regret's death, Truth appoints the Brutes as the Prophet's new right hand, taking over for the Elites. So far, the Elites reluctantly agree to the change. For his next mission, the Arbiter is sent on a mission to Delta Halo's library to retrieve the ring's activation index, much like Chief did in the first game. The Flood show up here too, but in spite of that, the mission mostly goes off without a hitch. However, the Arbiter is beaten to the punch by UNSC forces led by Miranda and Johnson. After a one-sided battle, the Arbiter retrieves the index, only to be stopped by Tartarus, who takes a now unconscious Keyes and Johnson hostage, and, in a shocking twist, reveals to the Arbiter that he's going to execute him by order of the Prophets. With the blast of his hammer, Tartarus sends the Arbiter down a seemingly bottomless pit. Master Chief and the Arbiter are revealed to have been saved by a large monstrous-looking intelligent creature containing the collective conscious of all Flood forms, known as the Gravemind. This Gravemind, instead of infecting the Spartan and Elite, forms an uneasy alliance with them to stop the ring's activation. The Gravemind teleports both of them to likely spots where the index would be found. He transports Chief directly into the heart of High Charity, where he must fight his way through what is now a civil war to reach the Prophets before they escape. It turns out that the Covenant's attempted purge of the Elites led to an all-out war, pitting Elites, Grunts, and Hunters against Brutes, Jackals, and Drones. Before the Chief arrives, Truth hands the index off to Tartarus, tasking him with activating the ring while he and Mercy flee in their key ship. On cue, the Flood crash land in a hijacked In-Amber-clad, quickly overrunning the Covenant forces. An infection form gets through the crowd, tackling the Prophet of Mercy. Tartarus comes to his aid before being stopped by Truth, telling the Brute to leave him behind. We then see that the Arbiter was sent to the surface of the ring just outside the control room. At this point, he still isn't convinced that the Great Journey is a lie, but still presses on to take revenge on the Brutes. Back on High Charity, Chief questions a dying Mercy on Truth's whereabouts, and sets off to find it. Chief manages to board Truth's ship just in time, but Cortana stays behind just in case the ring is activated, so she can detonate In-Amber-clad's engine, effectively repeating their plan from CE. Back on the ring, the Arbiter reunites with Shipmaster and incidentally saves Johnson from being executed. Johnson and the Elites team up so they can take down Tartarus, who had just recently arrived at the control room with Miranda and Guilty Spark. Arbiter confronts the Chieftain inside, pleading with him to stop his plan. After Tartarus refuses, Arbiter asks Guilty Spark for clarification on Halo's purpose. After some tension, Johnson arrives to slightly even the odds and keep negotiations going. 343 goes on to tell the destructive nature of the rings, making Arbiter finally realize that he was being lied to. In contrast, Tartarus refuses to accept the truth, forcing Miranda to use the index, activating the ring. The final battle of the game ensues, with Arbiter killing Tartarus and Miranda taking the index, stopping the ring from firing. In the aftermath, Guilty Spark explains that since a ring has been deactivated during its firing process, it's now on standby for a remote activation from the Ark, a place where every ring could be fired from. The last two scenes show Truth's key ship arriving at Earth, with Chief aboard claiming that he's
finishing this fight,
and Cortana in the flood-infested, lifeless High Charity being confronted by the Gravemind, who says that he's going to interrogate her. Cortana ends the game by simply saying,
"All right, shoot."
To this day, I can never decide if Halo 2 has my favorite story out of all of the games. I can at least say with certainty that it's a huge step up from CE and is simply unmatched in its world building. The decision to flesh out the Covenant and heavily focus on the Arbiter was a great decision, with him and Shipmaster becoming favorites of mine. It's unfortunate that I never got to experience these stories in their intended order, but I'm overall glad that this game's story exists. No complaints from me. This time around, there are a lot more characters to talk about, with all of them being pretty memorable. Like last time, I'm going to start with Master Chief and Cortana. I could be wrong in saying this, but it feels like Chief talks less in this game than he did in CE. However, pretty much everything he says in this game has a huge impact, with several of his lines becoming incredibly well known, not just in the Halo sphere, but gaming as a whole. He's pretty much a one-liner machine, which works quite well for this game with all of the character development going to the other lead. Also, this is probably one of my coldest opinions, but his Mark 6 armor looks way better than his Mark 5. As for Cortana, she's the same personality-wise, but she looks completely different. Instead of being purple or even green, she's a more bluish color now, which would remain going forward. She also has longer hair. They changed all the right things and kept what needed to be kept. Next up is Sergeant Johnson, who received a huge overhaul in this game. In CE, he was nothing more than a silly background character who could die in multiple missions and even seemingly dies in the legendary ending. I'm assuming he was brought back due to popular demand, but I have no idea. Either way, it was a great choice. Johnson is super charismatic, serving as the comedic relief and part-time punching bag. He's also like best friends with Chief, and I like all of their small moments together. Now getting into some of the new characters, we have Miranda Keyes. There's not much to say about her other than she's capable and stoic. She has a pretty big presence throughout the game and usually serves as the straight man to Johnson's silliness. She's a cool character, but not super memorable. Lord Hood is the other new prominent UNSC figure, and I have even less to say about him than Miranda. He's the leader guy who does leader things, and that's really it. I don't dislike him, but I don't really care about him either. 343 Guilty Spark is back in this game, having survived the destruction of his ring. He plays a much more passive role in this game and mostly just serves as a Covenant artifact until he tells the truth of the rings to Arby and Tartar Sauce at the end. Not much to really say besides that, considering the events to follow. I'm glad that he was around in this game so he didn't forget him. The Covenant went from having 0 characters in the last game to 6 notable personalities, the most important of which is the Arbiter. He starts as devout, shunned, and obedient, while he ends the game having his eyes open, giving him confidence and the freedom to forge his own path. While they all weren't the most fun to play, each of Arbiter's missions do a fantastic job in setting him up for betrayal and then triumph. I love that even after being told the truth by the Gravemind, he isn't yet convinced, that it took until being told directly from Guilty Spark for him to finally realize. He's easily the most interesting character in the game, and his arc is what makes me love this story so much. Also, his armor is pretty dang cool. Next up is Shipmaster, aka Halfjaw, a Spec Ops elite in white armor usually recognized by his damaged mandibles. He's not a super prominent character, but is usually around when the Arbiter is. He's a fearless, well-spoken leader who deeply cares for his squad. While he doesn't undergo a crazy transformation like the other elite does, he's still become one of my favorite characters in the Halo universe, probably because of how cool he is. Now I'm going to talk about the Prophets, the most notable of which is Truth. He's cunning, sinister, and arrogant to the point of letting both of his fellow hierarchs die to seize more power for himself, and choosing to betray an entire race in the middle of a war not only against humans, but the Flood as well. The Prophet of Mercy is the least notable of which being the most faithful, stubborn, and oldest of the 3. He's basically there to give additional context to anything Truth says and spout off religious speak. The last of the prophets is Regret, who is much more outspoken and overzealous than his 2 companions. He chooses to attack Earth being outnumbered, with it eventually being his downfall, getting beaten by Master Chief. The last of the Covenant members is Tartarus, who is overly confident and proud. He serves as the leader of the Brutes and is essentially Arbiter's rival. At the end of the game, he is presented with the same truth as the Arbiter, but instead chooses to ignore any sign that his religion is a lie and dies because of it. While he wasn't super prominent, I do want to quickly mention the Heretic leader. While he doesn't do much, he does plant seeds of doubt into the Arbiter about the Covenant's ideals. It's just weird how he fired on Arby when it seemed like he was willing to hear him out. Lastly is the Gravemind. It's a super imposing and clever being who manipulates to get what it wants. Its appearance is a bit different between Classic and Anniversary. I personally prefer his Anniversary appearance, making him much more gross looking. Overall, this game introduced lots and lots of new characters and somehow makes them memorable at worst and beloved at best. With the story being on a much larger scale this go around, the different factions and groups were bound to get updates as well. With the UNSC, we get a much better idea of their chain of command now, since we aren't focusing on only one of their ships. I like the through line of Johnson leading the Marines, Keyes commanding him, and Lord Hood seemingly being at the top. We also get to see how much they value protecting Earth with their orbital defense grid stations. This game is also our first look at Earth itself, mainly the older parts of the city Mombasa. It's also this game where we're introduced to the extremely popular Orbital Drop Shock Troopers, or ODSTs for short. The game doesn't explain much about them besides showing them drop into battle by the way of their signature drop pods. They're essentially the middle ground between Marines and Spartans. They're much more capable than the former, but aren't much compared to the latter. While the UNSC were given some cool new additions, the Covenant received that tenfold. We get introduced to new species, weapons, and vehicles, as well as their infrastructure, ideals, and hierarchy. It's shown that the Covenant view the Forerunners as gods, and their creations as holy and precious. Their goal is to activate one of the rings as they believe it will ascend them to godhood or something like that, which they call the Great Journey. They even have religious names for Forerunner technology, like calling the monitors oracles and the activation index the sacred icon. They also viewed the Master Chief as a devilish figure, so they call him the Demon. Like I mentioned before, the game almost doubled the amount of species in the Covenant by introducing brutes, drones, and prophets, making them have 7 species total. Through cutscenes and gameplay, you're shown that prophets are at the top of the pyramid, making all of the diplomatic decisions. Elites are slightly lower than them, still being on their council, and are the leaders on the battlefield. Brutes are arguably next, serving mostly as muscle until they take over for the elites on the council later in the game. Then hunters, jackals, drones, and grunts are all below that, essentially just being numbers on the battlefield. Although it seems like grunts are shown to be treated poorly by some of the other species. There was a change made so that along with grunts, elites, brutes, and prophets all speak English now, which was definitely the right change in my opinion. I don't know what I'd do in a world without
Demon Flare, scatter!
Going into gameplay stuff, any species that was in the first game stayed pretty much the same apart from slight rank differences. Although I do want to quickly highlight the Elite's new Honor Guard and Ranger ranks, which are both super cool in their own right. The one exception is that some jackals forgo their shields and instead use beam rifles, which is the bane of all legendary difficulty players' existence. Brutes don't have shields like elites, so they're easier to take out with kinetic weapons, and they also have an interesting mechanic where if the other brutes in their squad dies, they'll drop their weapon and start berserking. In this state, their head is lowered and they move much faster. They soak up a lot more damage and try to rush their enemies. Their melee is now much more deadlier, being both faster and stronger. Drones are meant to be much easier enemies, with their difficulty being that it's more difficult to hit them, with them flying around everywhere and showing up in large groups. Their goal is to ambush the player and quickly overwhelm them. Thankfully, they don't have a lot of health. Technically, you never fight the prophets as a species apart from the Regret boss fight, so there isn't much to talk about there. I do briefly want to mention the Heretic faction despite them not having much depth. The faction is made up of elites and grunts who no longer believe in the Great Journey and are actively fighting against the Covenant. They don't really offer much difference in gameplay versus fighting Covenant elites and grunts, besides that these grunts are strong in their convictions so they won't ever get scared or flee. The Heretic faction stands out by having yellow armor and their ranks oddly choosing to not wear helmets. Anytime they're fought, they're aided by sentinels. Speaking of which, the Forerunners received a few updates to their ranks as well. The first and most obvious of which is the addition of the Enforcer Sentinels. They're much larger and tougher compared to the familiar Aggressor variant, with a hard light shield in the front and 2 arms that can grab opposing vehicles. Going along with the topical segues, the Aggressor Sentinels received a new Gold rank which gives them better shields and a much better Gold Sentinel Beam, which I'll go over later. I'd also like to briefly mention the Constructor Sentinels. While they don't attack the player and only serve to maintain the Forerunner structures, it's nice to see them flying around. They're just little guys doing their job. Lastly, I want to talk about the Flood. They're the only faction to not receive any new gameplay additions, but tweaks have been made to them to change things up a bit. They no longer randomly reanimate like they did in CE, however infection forms can now infect dead combat forms and reanimate them that way. Besides that, combat forms can drive vehicles now, which is pretty scary. The next campaign thing I want to cover is the different ways you can play it. Much like CE, Halo 2's Anniversary version is a new set of graphics, music, and sounds overlaid over the original. At any time, you can instantaneously switch between Classic and Anniversary. You can also now use the toggle during cutscenes, although the timing of them might not be exact. Instead of being given the same treatment as the gameplay, the cutscenes have been overhauled, practically being pre-rendered short films which look absolutely stunning. There are very minor differences between the two story-wise, with Anniversary sometimes adding more visual details or altering a few moments to look better or make more sense. Personally, Anniversary looks unequivocally better, with the only downside being that differences in the environment between versions may occasionally cause issues with hitboxes. I actually really don't care for 2's classic graphics, as I don't care for the washed out and dirty look of everything. Oddly enough, despite that, I almost always find myself playing with the classic graphics, as it usually feels smoother to play and is practically required when using certain skips and tricks. As for the music, Halo 2's soundtrack is a step up from CE, which was already fantastic. My only issue with the classic soundtrack is that everything always sounds a bit quiet. Regardless, I much prefer the Anniversary tracks, as they sound more exciting and impactful. It just sucks that Blow Me Away was not able to be remastered, although its replacement, Breaking the Covenant, in no way disappoints. Halo 2 was the first game to launch with collectibles, in this case, skulls. Not only are they collectibles, but they can also be picked up and used as a weapon. Halo 2 is also the only game in the series requiring you to be on Legendary difficulty to collect them. Also, the I Would Have Been Your Daddy skull may be the most insufferable skull to get in the entire series. If you know, you know. In addition to skulls, the Anniversary version of the game added terminals, which are implemented exactly as CE, this time showing 3 separate stories. One from the heretic leader Cessa Refami, one from a Covenant scribe, and one from Jameson Locke from Halo 5. H2A also has an exclusive collectible in plush toys of 8 different characters. These ones especially are pretty out of the way compared to the others. It's probably a good time to mention that Halo 2 is not exactly well put together. Both the campaign and multiplayer have quirks that likely resulted from the game not having enough development time, leading to oversights, bugs, and unintended features. On the campaign side of things, there are a multitude of tricks and skips that make this a speedrunner's dream. Pretty much every mission has something interesting to offer in that regard. A good example is the mission Outskirts. Instead of progressing through the mission as normal, going through the streets of Mombasa, you can somewhat easily jump onto the rooftops and skip the first half of the mission. This isn't even the craziest example. There are also some tricks that allow you to despawn groups of enemies, fly across the map using an energy sword, and the greatest in my opinion is a trick that allows you to become invincible on the mission Oracle. I want to make it clear that this by no means bogs down my experience of the game. Actually, in some ways, it enhances it. It feels like there's a whole different way to approach each level if you know the secrets. I mean, who doesn't want to fight Tartarus Maximus with a Spectre and 3 extra Sergeant Johnsons? The last thing I want to go over that involves campaign is the difficulty. Halo 2 to this day is widely regarded as the hardest game to beat on Legendary, and for good reason. The most infamous of its roadblocks are Jackal Snipers. Jackal Snipers in this game are outfitted with beam rifles which one-shot the player on Legendary no matter where the shot lands. This, accompanied with them having great awareness and almost perfect accuracy, makes them something to be feared. What also doesn't help is that they're practically everywhere in the missions they appear in, so even when you manage to take 1 or 2 out, there's usually a third ready to take you out. Jackal Snipers are probably the worst example, but every single enemy shares their amazing awareness and accuracy. Not to mention that enemies fire their weapons incredibly fast. That, coupled with elites that dual-wield plasma rifles or brutes that use their own version of the plasma rifle, and you got yourself enemies that can kill you in the blink of an eye. Also, to make the game even harder, if you play co-op with someone on Legendary, if one of you dies, you both go back to the previous checkpoint, essentially giving the effect of an Iron Skull that you can't turn off. This makes achievements like beating Legendary in under 3 hours much more difficult. The only nerf to the player, depending on difficulty, is that Arbiter's camo lasts less time and takes longer to recharge the higher your difficulty. While I'm on the topic of difficulty, I want to quickly give my opinion on the game's 3 boss fights, those being the Heretic Leader, Regret, and Tartarus. Also, I'm talking mostly about them in regards to fighting them on Legendary. The Heretic leader fight is probably the most balanced, with him taking a fair amount of damage before he goes down, all the while being backed up by his tangible holograms, all of which dual-wield plasma rifles which kill you quite quickly. Regret honestly just sucks and isn't fun. Every time you get a hit off on him by boarding his chair, he summons in grunts and honor guard elites. He'll eventually throw you off his chair, making you land pretty much anywhere, but usually it's in the middle of the ground floor, which is where all of the enemies usually stay. That, coupled with the fact that the game is super stingy on checkpoints, makes this a frustrating experience. Third and easiest of which is Tartar Banks. You can't damage him normally, instead having to wait for Johnson to temporarily disable his shields first. He sometimes calls in a few brutes as backup, but overall it's a pretty easy fight as long as you can keep the big man at a safe distance, which is pretty easy in of itself. All in all, I think it's cool that this game tried its hand at boss fights and wish they built off of them in the next game rather than pretty much scrapping them. While I don't have much experience playing on the lower difficulties besides Heroic, I can confirm that Heroic is harder overall than CE's Heroic. It's not nearly as bad as Legendary, but still an unexpected challenge compared to what you'd expect. While I didn't keep track of my deaths in either playthroughs of each game, I do know for a fact that I died significantly less in CE than I did in 2 on both difficulties. Lasso is a whole nother beast entirely. CE Lasso can either be quite easy or downright awful for Lasso standards depending on the level. Halo 2 is a nightmare throughout the whole thing. I'm not going to run through every skull, but you can't see your HUD, which is the least of your problems. Enemies have double health, are always the highest rank, fire their weapons even faster and more often, don't flinch when they're shot, have even better awareness than before, and on top of that, every enemy in the game has permanent active camo. Good luck! Black Eye is also around with both a huge upside and downside. Normally, your shields won't recharge unless you melee an enemy. In this game specifically, you only get your shields back if your melee kills them. This absolutely sucks, but is made up for the fact that if you melee kill enough enemies, you can get yourself a full overshield. The only other saving grace is the Sputnik skull, making trick jumps and skips much easier. Just for fun, here is a side-by-side of the beginning of the level Uprising on Legendary and Lasso.
Troops betrayed us.
With all of the campaign-centered stuff out of the way, I now want to talk about one of my favorite aspects of Halo, its combat sandbox. I'm going to change up the order I talk about them slightly, starting with the weapons, then the power-ups, and capped off by the vehicles. Also, something important to mention is that Halo 2 Anniversary does have its own version of multiplayer which added new sandbox items. I will go over the new items at the end of their respective section. As for covering differences between weapons in Classic versus Anniversary, items that exist in both are typically made to act as similarly to each other as possible, so when I talk about them, it's encompassing both. Classic Halo 2 launched with 16 weapons, which is double that of CE's launch kit, and 6 more total after factoring the 2 added in the PC version. Out of CE's 10 weapons, 8 of them returned in some capacity. The 2 that didn't were the assault rifle, which did later return in Anniversary multiplayer, and the flamethrower, which is gone entirely for now. As a slight spoiler, my opinion on the weapons are either going to be quite positive or negative, with little in between. Starting with the returning weapons, we have what may be one of the worst weapons in the entire franchise, being Halo 2's version of the Magnum. It lost pretty much everything that made it good from CE, being its high damage and outstanding range. It doesn't even have a scope this time around.
What happened?
It also doesn't help that it's been outclassed completely by another UNSC weapon that I'll talk about soon. It can be dual-wielded, which I guess can be used in tandem with the plasma pistol, but I would only ever use it if I had no other choice. Next up is the sniper rifle, which in practice doesn't have any notable changes apart from losing its night vision scope, but that doesn't hurt the weapon's viability at all. Next I'll go over the rocket launcher, which has actually seen a huge upgrade in its ability to track enemy occupied vehicles, making it the best in the series. So much so that outside of variants in future games, it would never have this strong of an ability again. Sadly, next up is 2's version of the shotgun, which is my least favorite version of my overall favorite weapon in the series. It maintained its large mag size and fire rate, but had its damage range severely nerfed. I understand completely that this is a shotgun and intended to be used short range, and that CE's iteration's damage range was too much, but 2 took it too far in the opposite direction. It's outclassed by the energy sword not only for killing Flood, but any enemy for that matter, and its only real niche is that it counters the sword in multiplayer. At least it still looks and sounds super cool in both Classic and Anniversary. Moving over to the returning Covenant weapons, the first of which is the Plasma Pistol. Overall, while this thing is dual wieldable now, it feels much weaker than its CE counterpart to the point where it's only useful for stripping shields, and even then, its charge shot feels much more sluggish this time around. Similarly, the plasma rifle has been downgraded, losing its stun ability, mid-range accuracy, and what feels like damage as well. All that and only gaining the ability to dual wield, not a fair trade in my opinion. The Needler is a weird case because its fire rate has been reduced but given the ability to dual wield. The Needler is a super combined machine in campaign when dual wielded, but maybe one of the worst multiplayer weapons of all time regardless if you have 1 or 2. The last of the returning weapons is the Fuel Rod Cannon. It looks and plays completely differently from how it was in CE by now being yellow instead of purple and now firing straight instead of arcing like a mortar. Both changes are for the better. Funnily enough, as a weird coincidence, it's only available in the campaign, being absent from Classic multiplayer, which is the opposite from how it was in CE. It did return in Anniversary multiplayer, except in that it acts like it did in Halo 3 through 4, having its projectiles bounce. Now we get into the new stuff, starting with the UNSC side. With the iconic assault rifle's absence, 2 new weapons rose to prominence, the SMG and the battle rifle. The SMG is the most similar to CE's AR, having a 60-round mag, fast fire rate, and being intended for close-range encounters. It's also dual wieldable, making it a decent option for crowd control. While the SMG took inspiration from the function of the assault rifle, the battle rifle takes inspiration from its appearance and is the most important weapon in Halo 2, bar none. It's a 3-round burst tactical rifle with a scope intended for mid to long range. It feels incredibly accurate and satisfying to use, especially in Anniversary multiplayer. There's pretty much no reason you shouldn't be carrying one of these at all times. It left such a mark that it became the base starting weapon for competitive play for 4 out of the 5 games it appeared in. My only issue with it is that it's too good, to the point where several other weapons that are used in the mid-range area feel completely outclassed by it. It's this game's CE Magnum, but not as overpowered. On the Covenant side of things, there's a lot more new to enjoy. This game introduced a fair amount of Covenant counterparts to existing UNSC weapons. Look no further than the beam rifle being their version of the sniper. It's very similar to the sniper rifle with a double zoom and headshot multiplier. Its slight difference comes from it having no magazine, instead having a battery that can overheat like other plasma-based weapons. This can either work to your advantage or disadvantage depending on how well you pace your shots. Next is my favorite new addition, being the Covenant Carbine. It serves as the counterpart to the battle rifle, but does enough differently to make it distinct. It's a semi-auto tactical rifle with a much faster fire rate than that of the BR, with a higher spread and less range. I think it's easy to argue that the BR is objectively the superior weapon, but the Carbine is no slouch and has always been my preferred of the two. This next weapon could be argued as a counterpart to the shotgun, but is quite a bit different in a lot of ways. The energy sword that appeared in CE is now usable in this game, and man is it broken. It's Halo's first melee weapon, and that shows through its quirks. With it, you have 2 types of swings. Regular swings using the melee button, and lunges using your fire button. Both attacks will do the same amount of damage, but the lunge has more range. If your reticle turns red, you'll be able to lunge at your target, essentially quickly propelling you towards them, unleashing a devastating hit. While it has a certain amount of uses in campaign and Anniversary multiplayer, its classic multiplayer version has unlimited ammo, making it a constant force on the map. This weapon is arguably Halo's most recognizable and coolest looking weapon, usually most agreed upon by fans. Not only that, but due to a bug with its lunge letting you soar long distances, it's also a speedrunner's best friend. The last 2 Covenant weapons were made specifically for use by brutes. You can tell because both have brute in their name. The first and least interesting of which is the Brute Plasma Rifle. This is a crimson-colored plasma rifle with a faster fire rate but faster overheat time, exemplifying the Brute's aggressive nature. In my opinion, I prefer using this to the base version of the weapon. The other new Brute weapon is the Brute Shot, a sick-looking grenade launcher with a huge blade at the end. Its grenades bounce off hard surfaces before detonating, doing a moderate amount of damage. Its blade isn't just for show either, as it can instantly kill an enemy in multiplayer if you jump beforehand. There's one more weapon to talk about, being the Forerunner Sentinel Beam. Like the name implies, it's dropped by sentinels and is most effective against the Flood. It fires a constant laser beam until it overheats. Much like plasma weapons, it doesn't have a magazine, instead having a battery, so if this thing runs out of ammo, you'll have to find a new one. It's a pretty decent option at mid-range, sort of acting like an SMG type weapon. Also, while it doesn't have an official name, there's a golden variant of the weapon that does more damage. Overall, Halo 2 introduced some cool iconic weapons, but its sandbox is one of my least favorite in the series due to its high disparity in viability. Moving over to the anniversary multiplayer editions for weapons, we have two, which are both from the UNSC. The first is the Assault Rifle, which acts very similarly to how it does in Halo 4, which is to say it's pretty good. The other weapon is a first for Halo multiplayer, being the Suppressed SMG, which appeared once prior in Halo 3 ODST. What sets it apart from its base counterpart is its scope and suppressor. These two attachments give it a bit more range and accuracy, making it a viable mid-range option. It also happens to be dual wieldable, although the scopes are inaccessible if you choose to do so. Throwing things over to the grenades, there isn't much to mention as no new types were added. However, it's very apparent that both frags and plasma's damage radius has been noticeably reduced. Besides that, frags no longer need to come to rest before exploding. These two tweaks made grenade jumping much easier and more intuitive in this game compared to CE. Moving into the power-ups, classic Halo 2 ports over both the overshield and active camo 1-to-1 with only a single change. That being that overshield is now yellow instead of red. That's it. One thing to note though is that both power-ups are only found in multiplayer and are completely absent from campaign. Anniversary multiplayer shook things up by adding the Speed Boost power-up, which was first introduced in Halo 4. Like the name implies, it gives you a boost to your movement speed for a short duration. As a little fun fact, this is the only game with Speed Boost that doesn't require it to be picked up with your interact button. To fit the aesthetic of the other two, Speed Boost was made to be a floating green orb. Vehicles have received quite a bit of love in this game, not only making handling and functionality a lot better, but this game also adds 2 new drivable vehicles, 1 new variant of an existing vehicle, 2 mounted turrets, and 3 new non-drivable vehicles. I have to start off this section by talking about the overhaul in vehicle handling for vehicles across the board. No longer are they super slippery and death machines if they so much as breathe on you. The only downside to this is you lose the ability to make sharp turns on a dime, but the pros vastly outweigh the cons. Not only that, but their health system has been overhauled too. No longer are most of them invulnerable, instead showing visual damage generally where they were hit, with their overall appearance letting you in on its health state. Vehicles even have weak points, like the Ghost's booster or the Scorpion's vent. Not to mention the new hijacking and boarding mechanics that I went over earlier. Also, this could be considered a pro or con depending on your preference, but sitting in a passenger seat no longer puts you in first person. Speaking of which, the only way you can enter a vehicle with a multiplayer objective is by sitting in a passenger seat. Any other seat like a driver or turret position will force you to drop the objective. On the UNSC side, things mostly stayed the same, with it maintaining the Warthog and Scorpion. Warthogs specifically have received the ability to brake, handbrake, and even honk. They also received a new variant called the Gauss Hog. It's virtually the same vehicle apart from its mounted chain gun turret being replaced with a mounted fast-firing railgun that is extremely useful. When it comes to the Scorpion, besides no longer allowing players to sit along its treads, it hasn't received any notable changes that don't fall under the new vehicle standards in this game. On the Covenant side, things get a lot more interesting. All Covenant vehicles have been given the ability to boost, which increases their forward speed by quite a bit, with the downside making their turning capability practically zero. The Ghost is a much faster and deadlier option this time around, but its weak spot is quite vulnerable, making it sometimes go down extremely easily. Its weapons now alternate firing instead of firing simultaneously like in CE. The Banshee received a cool new option letting you do aerial tricks, letting you dodge incoming fire a lot more effectively. There's also a Heretic paint job of the Banshee that's yellow and purple, but functions the exact same. For whatever reason though, Banshees in multiplayer are unable to shoot Banshee bombs. The Wraith is now a drivable vehicle letting you fire off plasma mortars quite quickly. Newly introduced in this game is the Spectre, which is the Covenant equivalent of the Warthog. This thing has 4 seats, 1 driver, 1 for the mounted turret, and 2 passenger seats, 1 on each side. The plasma turret in the back is quite useful, but probably not as good as the Warthog's chain gun. It's overall slower than the Warthog when driving normally, but has better mobility. Like the other Covenant vehicles, this also comes with boosting capabilities. I love this thing, and it really sucks that it never appeared again. The Shade Turret returns in this game, but has a sleeker, albeit less armored design. While I never find myself using it, it's a step up in viability over CE's iteration. Speaking of turrets, it's here where I'll talk about the 2 mounted turrets, even though there isn't much to say about them. They're placed in fixed positions, essentially acting like stationary vehicles. They're quite powerful, but you leave yourself incredibly exposed while using them. The UNSC turret is incredibly similar to the Warthog's chain gun, while the plasma turret is similar to a slower firing but more accurate Ghost. The last 3 vehicles I want to mention are new to this game but are not usable by the player. The first of which are the Phantom dropships. These completely replace the Spirits from CE, look pretty awesome, and are deadlier, having 3 turrets instead of the Spirit's 1. Next is the popular Scarab tank, which is the focus of the Metropolis level as well as the mission Great Journey heavily featuring one. They serve more as mobile bases rather than vehicles, but getting to take one down in Metropolis will never not be awesome. Lastly is the commonly forgotten Shadow. The Shadow is a larger transport vehicle that is meant to transport small vehicles like Ghosts and infantry, all the while having a mounted turret on the front. It only appears in Outskirts and has never appeared in any FPS Halo game since. It sucks too because it looks like a fun vehicle to drive. Oh well. Before moving on, I want to mention the vehicles that were added with the Anniversary multiplayer, all of them being on the UNSC side. The first and most notable of which is the Mongoose. The Mongoose was originally planned to be in Halo 2 but was cut at some point in development, so it's nice to see it restored here. Not only that, but the Anniversary multiplayer also introduced the Gun Goose, a variant of the Mongoose with a mounted gun on the front. As a fun fact, while the Gun Goose would return in later titles, this is the only iteration with a chain gun. The next vehicle, which is also pretty notable, is the Hornet. This was monumental at the time because it had only appeared in Halo 3, and to this day is its only other appearance. Next up is the Civilian Warthog, which is a gold-colored variant without a turret in the back. It's the first time in the series that you were able to use a Warthog in multiplayer without a turret, which was a surprisingly commonly requested addition, as odd as it sounds. Lastly, even though it's not technically a vehicle, but I feel like it fits better in this section, is the removable machine gun turret. This distinguishes itself from the other UNSC turret by being detachable, like is possible in Halo 3 and beyond, giving you a little bit of mobility, but giving you a limited amount of ammo. Also, I want to quickly mention here that for some reason, Anniversary multiplayer does not contain the Spectre. I have no idea why they didn't bring it over, but unfortunately, they didn't. Multiplayer returned with a vengeance in this game, not only adding new ways to play, but also paving the way for online multiplayer in gaming as a whole. Before going into the new additions, I have to mention that Halo 2 was ground zero for the new Xbox Live. Xbox Live would allow you to match and communicate with players across the globe, with the only requirements being an internet connection and an Xbox Live subscription. I know that this all seems so tame nowadays, but it's really important to stress that Halo 2 was the catalyst for online multiplayer. Anyways, with that said, Halo 2 multiplayer built off of CEs by adding new maps, new game modes, and more options to modify the maps and modes. Multiplayer also had a few innovations of its own, the first of which being interactive map elements like midship seesaw platform, and more famously Zanzibar's deployable bridge and gate button. Gravelists were also added to maps to add more vertical traversal options as well as fusion coils to make the environment a little more hostile. Two things that were removed, however, were the race game mode and the crazy weapon physics, no longer letting you launch weapons across the map with explosions. Halo 2 added multi-team functionality with you now having the team options of yellow, green, purple, orange, brown, and pink team. Red and blue are still the default though, and are used for every mode with 2 teams. Most game modes have players start off with an SMG and 2 frag grenades. Although on Covenant themed maps, this is changed to a plasma rifle and 2 plasma grenades. And if we're talking competitive modes, then players will start with a battle rifle and 2 frags. Going into the modes, Halo 2 brought back Slayer, CTF, King of the Hill, and Oddball, while adding new built-in variants of each for more replayability. Not only that, but this game added 3 brand new game modes, the first of which is Juggernaut. While it has its different variants, typically Juggernaut is a free-for-all mode that pits everyone against one player who has some sort of advantage, like faster movement speed, higher damage resistance, etc. The next and my favorite of the 3 is Assault. Assault is essentially CTF but backwards, having you carry a bomb to the enemy base to arm it and defend it so that it goes off. Much like CTF, this mode is team-based and includes variants like one where both teams each have a bomb to plant, one where there's a single bomb that teams are fighting over, and one where there are attackers and defenders. The last of the new game modes is Territories, which is a team-based mode where your goal is to capture multiple hills existing at the same time in order to score. While Territories wouldn't last long in the Halo space, it would be used as the basis for popular modern modes such as Strongholds and Land Grab. Custom game options being so open and diverse would inspire the community to create several game types of their own, the most famous of which being Infection. When it comes to the multiplayer maps, Halo 2 launched with 12, which is 1 less than CE. Although it eclipses CE's total in 19 by having 25 total after map packs are factored in. Which not only that, but Halo 2 specifically introduced a fair number of maps that would be considered timeless. Out of the 12 launch maps, 4v4 or Arena got 7, and 8v8 or Big Team Battle got the other 5. One of the 7 Arena maps is a remake of a map from CE, so I'll start there. Battle Creek was remade into Beaver Creek, with the only notable change being that the ladders were replaced with slopes. Now on to the new maps. Ascension was never my favorite, but it's not at all bad. I don't think I've ever played a game with actual people on Colossus, and I honestly don't really want to. Foundation looks super cool and is super close to being 4-way symmetrical. Also, as a fun fact that I didn't know until making this video, but Foundation to this day is the only Halo map that originally required you to unlock it before you can play it. In this case, you had to beat the campaign, although eventually the restriction was lifted and the map was just unlocked for everyone. Ivory Tower has always been one of my favorites and is one of the best looking in my opinion. Lockout is one of 3 now iconic competitive maps introduced in this game. For me, I like it more than I don't, but it's not my favorite. The last of the Arena launch maps is Midship, which is another iconic competitive map. While I don't care for it in its Halo 2 incarnation, I did love its take as Truth in Halo 5. Much like Arena, BTB has one map that was remade from CE, this time being Blood Gulch into Coagulation. Honestly, this version of Blood Gulch always felt too open, especially with being able to snipe from base to base, so it's definitely my least favorite incarnation. The new BTB maps start off in the middle of the road with burial mounds. I like the lore that you're fighting around some of the wreckage of Alpha Halo, but don't care to actually play on it. In contrast though, Headlong is one of my all-time favorite big team maps. I'll always enjoy storming the construction building in One Flag games. Waterworks is next, and it's one where I don't love it or hate it. At least it feels balanced. The last of the launch maps is Zanzibar, another favorite of mine for its storm the beach vibe and giant windmill. Over the course of its life cycle, Halo 2 saw the release of several map packs that could be purchased together or individually that would each come with a handful of maps totaling 13, with a similar distribution for Arena and BTB as the launch maps, with Arena getting one extra. I'm not going to break up each map by map pack because that's way too convoluted and unnecessary in my opinion. Out of the 8 arena maps, half of them are remakes, those being Desolation, Elongation, Tombstone, and Warlock being remakes of Derelict, Longest, Hang 'em High, and Wizard respectively. I don't have much to say about Desolation and Tombstone since I don't think I've played on either of them in matchmaking. Elongation is a step up from Longest, now having a conveyor belt gimmick that splits the map in half, although it's still not good. Warlock, just like Wizard, gets a plus for being 4-way symmetrical, but is still hectic from being small. I do at least like that all 4 have brand new aesthetics. Getting into the new maps, Backwash might be the most forgettable map in Halo, to the point where I forgot that it existed until stumbling upon it in the MCC menus. I do like that Penitent Tangent is flying around, which makes the map pretty unique. Gemini is themed after High Charity. That's all I have to say on it. It just feels so forgettable. What isn't forgettable, and maybe my favorite map in all of Halo, although the jury's still out on that one, is Sanctuary. It's a simple symmetrical circle with 2 bases connected by adjacent structures leading to a circular middle ring. All with a Forerunner Delta Halo temple style is the icing on the cake. Coming back down to Earth to cap off Arena, we have Turf, which I played on a surprising amount compared to the other maps in this game, and I honestly don't like it. It always felt a bit too cramped for me. As for BTB, unfortunately overall, the 5 DLC maps don't hit nearly as hard as the launch ones. Containment is Halo 2's Resident Snowy BTB map, and I guess I will say that it's better than CE's snowy maps. District I think I've played on once or twice, but it always felt sort of aimless. But I do like the idea of Mombasa Street's BTB. Relic is one I'm more familiar with, being a decent one flag map, but not my favorite. Terminal has a cool gimmick of the bullet train hazard, and it plays pretty well too. The last map ends on a positive note with Uplift. It's overall a pretty fun beach map. All in all, Halo 2's map quality is better as a whole than CE's, hitting super high highs, but also has some of the more forgettable maps in the series. Although I'll gladly take a Sanctuary, Zanzibar, and Headlong for every Colossus, Gemini, and Backwash. Revisiting the topic of Halo 2 jank for a moment, multiplayer has its fair share of quirks too, although my feelings towards them are definitely more negative than the quirks of campaign. Before that though, I want to point out a bug that is actually an issue in both modes, where sometimes when you reload your weapon, it won't play the animation, but your weapon will still reload, which is always a bit disorienting. There are 2 bits of jank that are more specific to multiplayer that can change the game quite a bit. The first of these is super bouncing. I apologize if I don't explain this completely correctly, as I only have a little experience doing it, but basically there are certain actions you can take to essentially launch yourself to amazing heights, which could be potentially abused to get you to places you aren't supposed to be. Overall, I don't think that this is a huge issue, as they usually require a bit of setup which multiplayer doesn't often afford you. Also, it pretty much only works on the original Xbox version of the game. The other and more prevalent issue in my opinion is the existence of button combos. I'll start off by saying that I know this is controversial, but let me explain my side. Basically, you can interrupt some actions with other actions like canceling your reload by melee, which I have no issue with in of itself. This game specifically lets you stop other animations with your reload button, which causes a lot of unintended effects that can give you an advantage. An example of this is the BXB combo, where you can essentially melee twice in incredibly quick fashion, killing your opponent almost instantly at close range. There's also the BXR, which lets you shoot immediately after meleeing, which is even more lethal. Another one that is even more devastating in my opinion is called the double shot, which allows you to shoot the battle rifle faster than intended, resulting in super fast long range kills. In my opinion, unintended mechanics that result in you being able to kill your enemy faster is simply too powerful. If the game had been released in our modern age, these combos would spread like wildfire, and a fair amount of the game's players would be doing them. Now I guess I'll compare it with something that is sort of equivalent, but that I actually do like. Without going too much into it here, Halo Infinite has an unintended mechanic called curb sliding that allows you to get much more speed when sliding in specific instances. I actually love curb sliding because all it does is make me go a little faster and has no real effect on my opponent. I will concede that I did not grow up with Halo 2, nor did I ever play it on more than a casual level, so I don't know all of the nuances when it comes to these button combos. However, I think that they're a bit much. Throughout the video, there has been a proverbial boogeyman that I've mentioned countless times up to this point but haven't elaborated on till now. That being Halo 2 Anniversary Multiplayer. Unlike CE, when Halo 2 got its anniversary treatment, they also decided to reimagine aspects of the multiplayer. Instead of being just a palette swap-like campaign, this would be its own thing with its own maps, sandbox, and feel, all the while trying to emulate a modern version of Halo 2. This resulted in a multiplayer that looked and played like a hybrid between Halos 2 and 4, which was the most recent release up to that point. It launched with 6 remade maps and 1 more post-launch, new sandbox items minus the Spectre, game modes from other Halo games, and even got its own incarnation of Forge mode. As a whole, I've always much preferred Anniversary Multiplayer to Classic due to preferring the more responsive gameplay and more appealing graphics, despite the much more limited map pool. Anniversary MP also featured a loadout system in its social modes, although your options were always quite limited. The only 3 loadout options were an SMG with 2 frags, a plasma rifle with 2 plasmas, or a magnum with 2 frags. Besides that, Anniversary MP did introduce 2 new smaller features that would actually become series mainstays. The first being that every map now has callout locations that appear above your radar, telling you where you are, which goes a long way in opening the door for communicating with teammates. The second is another quality of life feature, being that there's now an indicator that appears next to weapons that you're close to make them easier to spot. Also, I know that the sandbox items were tweaked from Classic to Anniversary to be more balanced, but I personally don't know the extent of these differences, and overall, unless directly mentioned, the versions feel almost identical balance-wise. As for new game modes, Anniversary features Infection, Ricochet, and the return of Race. When it comes to Infection, this game takes the cake for best infected design, with it being super gruesome, and also features a special red energy sword for infected. The much lesser known Ricochet is here too, which for those uninitiated is a football-like mode, and while I enjoyed it, this was the last game it officially appeared in. Race is back in a rare appearance without much change besides showing your current speed, as well as there being failsafes to keep you in a vehicle. Anniversary Multiplayer launched with 6 dev-made maps and had 1 added post-launch, making for 7 maps total, all of them being remakes of maps from 2's classic multiplayer. Something that I liked that most of these maps did was add some sort of interactable object to make matches more interesting. I'll talk about those when I get there. Not only that, but all 7 maps each feature a destroyable collectible in blast soda cans. They're hidden pretty well in each map, and destroying each will award you with an achievement. In terms of distribution, 4 of them were made for Arena, while the other 3, including the post-launch map, were made for BTB. Starting off strong in Arena is Lockdown, a remake of Lockout. This map is much brighter, taking place in the daytime, but overall stays consistent to the original. The only notable differences being a new cubby chute in the lift tower and 3 destructible ice stalactites that when destroyed will fall down, crushing any victims below. Next is Shrine, which is a remake of Sanctuary. This remake adds lifts to the bottom of each tower and buttons to the top of each base that, when shot, will temporarily mask the base behind waterfalls, making it difficult to see in or out. It also evolves the aesthetic, adding an open cliff to one side and also making it being reclaimed by nature. Warlord is the next remake, this one being of Warlock, and doesn't have any new interactable elements. It does add a small ledge to each corner though. I will say that despite me not liking playing on this map, it's my favorite version of the map to play, and I love how the lifts are color-coded to their respective sides. Also, the skybox is killer. The last of the arena maps is Zenith, a remake of Ascension. I don't have much to say other than that its interactable element is a button that activates a large dome shield in the middle of the map. Other than that, like every other anniversary map, it looks super pretty. Moving over to BTB, Coagulation was again remade into Bloodline, this time adding EMP towers to each base, giving you an option to temporarily disable vehicles. Stonetown is a remake of Zanzibar, and one I have a bone to pick with. This is actually Zanzibar's second remake, as it was first remade in Halo 3. That iteration of the map added a garage and a catwalk area to the base, and a bottom floor to Camp Frohman, which in my opinion improved the flow of the map. However, despite being made after its Halo 3 incarnation, Stonetown is a faithful remake to Zanzibar, specifically acting like Last Resort never existed. It's still a great map though. The last map, and the one that was added post-launch, is Remnant, a remake of Relic. This map doesn't make any crazy changes, but does make a few smaller ones, like changing the front ramps up to the base into grav lifts, and swapping out the Covenant Sniper Tower for a completely unique one. Overall, the remakes that were chosen were mostly good ones in my opinion, even if all of them aren't my favorite. Although it is curious as to why out of the 3 big team maps chosen, 2 of them are one flag maps, which is inherently a less common mode than regular CTF. Also, I do want to acknowledge that there were Forge maps that were made and put into matchmaking, but I'm not going to go over them. There are far too many for me to list, and they aren't even normally accessible in custom games. At the time of Halo 2 Anniversary Multiplayer's release, Forge had become a staple mode in each release from 3 onward. It's still kind of surprising to me that H2A MP, despite being a smaller scale multiplayer, would not only get its own version of Forge, but would also get new features not yet seen up to that point. I'm not going to go through all of Forge's features, despite this being my first time talking about it, as I will instead do that in my eventual video on Halo 3. Basically though, Forge is a map editor that allows you to place and delete objects on existing maps as well as build your own custom maps on the provided canvas maps. Speaking of canvases, H2A's Forge is the first to include completely blank canvases, both with no terrain whatsoever and also one with completely flat terrain. In previous iterations of Forge, maps that were built for Forge usually had their own terrain that couldn't be altered but had lots of open space around it to compensate. This game comes with 3 canvases. The first is a wash, which has a more tropical theme and has a layer of ankle-deep water to stand in. The second is Nebula, which is a completely blank canvas and is set in the beauty that is space. Third and last is Skyward, which is another blank canvas and is set in the sky in the center of a halo ring. In terms of innovations, the first one goes along well with all of the newfound empty space, giving you several terrain options like landmasses and cliff formations to make your own natural looking environments, which is a huge step up from the previous Forge only letting you place trees or rocks. Not only that, but Forge this time around took a huge leap forward, adding basic scripting functionality. This allows you to use some of the interactable objects on the dev maps like the gate on Stonetown or the EMP tower on Bloodline and pair them with switches so you can activate them using buttons. While this form of scripting was quite basic, it still felt revolutionary at the time and would only be iterated on further in the future. A new feature that isn't quite as flashy as the other 2 but still quite important is the precision movement mode that you can toggle while in monitor mode. This slows your movement down significantly, allowing you to better place objects to your liking. To go along with all of these, there is also a bar right below your shields that indicates how well your map performs on a technical level. The last thing I want to mention about Forge is that the structure blocks this time around take on a stone ruins aesthetic, which up to that point is easily the best look they've had compared to Reach's grey Forerunner blocks and 4's white industrial blocks. There might very well be some more smaller features that I missed, as I'm not the most well versed in H2A Forge, but these are at least the most notable changes in my opinion. The last corner of Halo 2 I want to cover is its customization. Since Halo 2 is only the second game in the series, there weren't a lot of notable additions, but there were still some decent ones. The biggest of these is the ability to play as an elite rather than a Spartan. Spartans in this game don the new Mark 6 armor, while elites have their standard armor used for all basic ranks. The other big change is that your armor now has both a primary and secondary color slot. Your primary color takes up a majority part of your armor, go figure, and your secondary adds accents to your forearms, legs, and helmet if you're a Spartan, while it has a more dominant presence if you're an elite, being on every part of your armor. Your secondary color in this game also will appear on your Spartan or elite in team games, with your team color only overriding your primary color. I think it's quite cool, but I kind of wish there was an option to make your primary your secondary for team games, since my main color is always used for my primary, and I'd like to see that in team games, but it's not a big deal. Halo 2 Classic is actually the only multiplayer to do this with your secondary color, as subsequent games would either mostly or fully overwrite your colors to that of the team you're on. Much like CE, Halo 2 features 18 total colors to choose from. Most of them are taken directly from CE, although there are some changes. Halo 2 features steel instead of black or gray, crimson instead of maroon, removes salmon in favor of violet, and adds olive. Pretty much every other color is very similar or identical to how it was in CE, although notably, now orange is less yellowy, cyan and teal are both darker, and sage looks more bluish. Classic also features an emblem maker, letting you customize an icon using a foreground or background. You're even able to color parts of it to your liking. This emblem is seen pretty much anywhere along where your gamer tag is, plus it's also placed as a decal onto both of your shoulders and your upper back. In Classic, I use a Spartan with an orange primary and blue secondary, and my favorite emblem is either Soul or Marathon. Moving on to Anniversary, since there are several game releases in between, H2A takes cues from the more recent titles, letting you customize individual parts of your armor. Specifically in this game, Spartans can customize their helmet, left and right shoulder, chest, forearm, and leg armor, while elites can customize their helmet, chest, arms, and legs. Oddly enough, at launch there were only 3 armor sets each for Spartans and elites. Elites unfortunately still only have 3, but Spartans have had lots of new, mostly wackier additions to bolster options. As you could probably tell, I don't like most of the post-launch armor sets, as they have really out there designs that aren't for me. Orion is the cool exception though, being Master Chief's original armor design from 1999. In terms of color options, there are 29, which matches the amount in the previous game being Halo 4. I did originally have a bone to pick with the color options, but it seems to have somewhat recently been fixed after several years of being an issue. For the longest time, the colors you're shown in the customization menu didn't always feel accurate to what you were actually picking. For example, my secondary is blue, which is displayed as a darker navy blue. However, in-game it looked completely different and more akin to how ice is displayed. You can see that in this screenshot where I still very much have the darkest blue equipped. Not every color had this issue, but I'm surprised that it persisted for so long. As for emblems, H2A is built into the Master Chief Collection, so your emblem for it is the same across all of the games in the collection. Because of this, emblem creation is the most customizable and robust it's ever been, having over 200 options for foreground, over 100 for background, and 31 color options each for all 3 layers. Unfortunately though, you do not have an option to place it on your armor. In H2A, I use a Spartan that has a coral orange primary and blue secondary, and whose armor is primarily Centurion except for the shoulders, which are both Mark 6. Even though I don't really use elites, mine has the Invader helmet, Outrider chest, and combat arms and legs. MCC also features unlockable victory poses for both Halo 2 Classic and Anniversary, which appear in the post-match leaderboards. Anniversary also has a few weapon skins for the AR, BR, Sniper, Rocket Launcher, and Shotgun. It's quite odd to me that CE would get customizable visors, but both versions of 2 didn't. Lastly, the weapon lowering bug in CE was made into a full-fledged feature in this game, letting you press down on the D-pad to lower your weapon. It works for almost every weapon as long as you're not dual wielding, and looks much better for rifles than it did in CE. It's also present in Anniversary, requiring you to hold jump, reload, zoom, and down on the D-pad, and works with every single weapon, and even when you are dual wielding. I want to take a brief detour to talk about the Master Chief Collection as a whole. I'm never going to make a video solely on it, and since Halo 2 Anniversary can only be played through MCC, I feel like now is the best time to talk about it. MCC contains every FPS Halo from Halo CE all the way to Halo 4. Both campaign and multiplayer are available to play for each game. There's also several forms of new and legacy customization for every game, as well as several ways to customize your profile, like the emblem creator, avatars, and nameplates. All of them have a few avenues in which to unlock them, such as unlocking specific achievements or completing challenges. The collection features 8 series passes that contain various cosmetics, with each being centered around some sort of theme or game. You unlock one tier at a time, being able to choose any item on the current page you're on before completing it and moving on to the next one. You unlock tiers using Spartan points. You can earn Spartan points both by leveling up your career rank and completing challenges from the challenge hub. Your career rank is a military-style rank where you can earn XP to progress through 30 ranks per tour before repeating the cycle for the next higher tier. You earn XP both by completing multiplayer matches as well as completing challenges. Speaking of challenges, in the Challenge Hub you'll find numerous weekly and monthly challenges that are separated by PvE and PvP. PvE challenges can be completed by playing Campaign, Firefight, or Spartan Ops, while PvP challenges can be completed in player versus player matches. With weekly challenges, only the ones highlighted in gold will give you Spartan points. You can also spend your Spartan points in the Exchange, which is a shop of more quote-unquote expensive items that rotates its stock weekly. Backing up a bit, MCC also features a match composer which allows you to search for the specific games and modes you would like to play and filter out the ones you don't want. There's also a custom games browser and Firefight browser where you can join other players' custom sessions. There's also various ranked playlists spanning the different games if you want to get competitive. Taking inspiration from the original Halo 2, your rank for each playlist starts at 1 and can go up to a maximum of 50. Your rank goes up when you win and down when you lose, with its own hidden XP system. Typically, the game will match you with people of the same or similar rank. MCC also features lots of quality of life settings like being able to watch all of the terminals on demand in the menus, being able to change your menu backgrounds, and it also has several modern FPS settings available like completely remappable controls, an FOV slider, server select, and several more other miscellaneous options. MCC also includes campaign playlists, mission leaderboards, and a par score and par time for each mission to keep your experience fresh, as well as each game getting new skulls, some from different games and some new altogether. To top it off, it has a staggering 700 achievements that will keep you busy for hours upon hours. I'll probably end up saying this for the next several Halo videos I do, but MCC is the best way to play the games that it includes. It takes all of its games and gives them so much more, making them feel fresh if you're coming from playing their original releases. Halo is never a big investment if you're on the ropes about playing it. I played the campaign twice for this video and a few games of both Classic and Anniversary multiplayer. All of that took me about 16 hours. In my opinion, Halo offers the perfect amount of reward for however much you want to invest in it.
This is too much.
If you only want to experience the story, then you could breeze through it in just a few hours. On the other side, you can spend tens or even hundreds of hours either playing multiplayer or working towards achievements. Much like its predecessor, Halo 2 has seen a few releases throughout the years that can make things a bit confusing since none of them are the exact same. I will do my best to explain things as simply and thoroughly as possible. First off, the original Halo 2 was released on the original Xbox in 2004. This version of the game contains campaign and multiplayer, but it no longer has the capability of letting you play online since April of 2010. It's playable both on the original Xbox as well as the Xbox 360 via backwards compatibility. You can get it physically online for only around $10-ish. Some of its map packs saw a physical release in the Halo 2 multiplayer map pack disc, which contains the Maptacular, Killtacular, and bonus map packs totaling 9 of its DLC maps. This disc only serves to update the base game as you cannot play Halo 2 through this disc. If you do want this though, it's also quite cheap, being around $15 USD. Next is Halo 2's first PC release, commonly called Halo 2 Vista. Released in 2007, it's quite similar to CE's PC port, with it getting some new content but ultimately doing more harm than good with its introduction of several graphical and gameplay issues. It did receive new content with 2 new multiplayer maps, but that's all it got. Like the original Xbox version, this one also doesn't offer online multiplayer due to the servers being shut down. While you can get this game physically for as low as $15, you need to make sure that you have a disk drive for it. On top of that, you might have to mess with your PC a bit to get it to run. The last and only modern option is the Master Chief Collection. MCC was released in 2014 on the Xbox One specifically for Halo 2's 10th anniversary, and would be the only way to play the anniversary version. This contains both the original Halo 2's campaign and multiplayer, now upscaled, and Halo 2's anniversary campaign and multiplayer. Both Classic and Anniversary now run at a minimum 60 FPS and have tons of new content, like new skull modifiers, new collectibles, new multiplayer cosmetics, and even the ability to use skulls in multiplayer. Oh, it also mostly fixed the issues that were brought on from the PC port, much like what MCC did with CE. MCC was originally released on the Xbox One, but was later upgraded for the series consoles. Not only that, but in 2019, MCC was slowly released on PC through both the Windows Store and Steam, with Halo 2 coming out in 2020. You can get MCC physically or digitally for $39.99, or you can get Halo 2 by itself for $9.99. Whether you're getting the collection or just Halo 2, both often go on sale, but are always a good deal regardless. If you couldn't already tell, in my opinion, MCC is the best and easiest way to play Halo 2. It's on every Xbox console release in the past 11 years and PC with no real downsides. Something I want to do with games that are in the same series is directly compare specific aspects of them so you can get a better idea of how they stack up against each other. For Halo, I will be comparing their soundtrack, story, missions, overall gameplay, sandbox, multiplayer, customization, and art style. Also, H2A will be ranked separately from Classic when talking about anything not campaign related, and CEA will be included in the soundtrack and art style categories. Starting off very opinionated for the soundtracks, H2A is the best hands down, followed by Classic Halo 2, then CE Anniversary, and last because I think it's quite a downgrade from the original. In terms of story, Halo 2 easily trumps CE, no contest. The bigger scale, more interesting characters, and the Covenant getting fleshed out makes it one of Halo's best stories, period. CE actually beats out 2 on its missions, as Halo 2 has a lot of misses gameplay wise for me, and its legendary isn't nearly as fun to play, especially in co-op. In terms of actual gameplay, Halo 2 Anniversary feels the best, with every action feeling much more impactful than older entries, followed by Classic Halo 2, which made moving around and jumping much more responsive, and CE and last for being a bit slippery and unrefined. Talking about their sandboxes though, CE is the best so far, having a small but very defined set of weapons that are all fun and useful in their own right compared to Halo 2's lopsided weapon balancing. H2AMP did help slightly with some of its tweaks, but still isn't that great. In terms of multiplayer experiences, H2A is at the top, having a fun and balanced experience, albeit with limited maps. CE comes in second, being chaotic fun, and H2C is in last with its weird exploits and dreary looking maps. Customization is pretty cut and dry. H2A pretty much wins by default, having more than just one option for armor. 2 Classic takes second due to me caring more about having 2 colors than just one, and CE is last since you could only change your color and visor. Lastly, for art style, H2A takes the cake, although I should mention that the campaign and multiplayer have different art directions, but I'm lumping them into one, and campaigns is better than multiplayers. Next is CE. This is probably a good time to mention that while a lot goes into each game's art style, the look of each game's Spartans play a big role for me. After that is CE Anniversary, looking good overall, but not ideal for what CE could have looked like. And finally is H2C, which I mentioned briefly earlier as looking dirty and washed out. I can't believe we finally arrived here, but here we are. Before I get into ranking this game, I just want to thank all of you who have stuck around for this behemoth of a video. I never expected this video to outpace CE's, especially not to this degree. I hope I've made this past hour and a half more enjoyable and entertaining. Also, I want to thank Viper073 aka Lunadium for all of her help on this video, as well as Chalk075 for their cameos in the co-op clips. With that said, ranking Halo 2 actually wasn't that difficult. I feel like it should be in the 5th slot between FRLG and Pikmin. It may come as a surprise that it's below CE after the comparison I made directly to it, but when it comes to the older Halos, I usually come back to play the campaign over the multiplayer, and CE is just more fun to play again and again. As for its spot overall, it's getting harder and harder to put into words why exactly it is where it is, but please keep in mind that I love all of these games so much. Thank you all so much for watching. Have you played Halo 2 before? If so, who is your favorite new character? Mine is probably Shipmaster, but the Arbiter is a close second. With that, thanks again, and I hope to see you again soon.
By the prophets! Arbiter!